Hey, I'm Quang. I'm a photographer, a toy maker, a product manager, and a collector. I love Ninja Turtles. That's like the first thing I can really remember collecting. But I collect a lot of Japanese soft vinyl, the Jumbo Machineders, a lot of I guess Japanese influenced kind of toys. I wouldn't limit it to just that. It's kind of incredible, all the new Phantom toys that are coming out. I used to love the cartoon that they would play where he's in the future and the movies and stuff. So it's I'd say a lot of licensed character toys. I've collected so many different things over the years, but Turtles is definitely a fixture in my life that I just always go back to. And it's kind of insane now that you can buy every iteration of the Turtles, and it's a pretty awesome thing to just kind of dive into, especially because I don't buy too many new things. So at least it's kind of cool to walk into a Target or a Walmart or whatever and be able to go pick up new Turtles on the shelf. But I have a lot of my old ones when I was growing up as a kid. And I think a lot of that stemmed from all the weird characters, because I grew up loving a lot of the Japanese TV shows and all the Japanese hero characters and things like that. And also Transformers. Transformers was huge for me as well. And there's actually a movie theater local to me that says, I purchased one of the seats in the theater, and it shows in a plaque that the Transformers 80s movie is my favorite movie of all time. The question of how long I've been collecting, I think for most collectors, it's kind of always, because collecting, there's two different aspects of it. There's the actively collecting, and then there's just when kids would sort of line things up on a shelf and look at them, And I think I've always sort of done versions of both. There's these milestones when it comes to adult collecting. And when I was younger, just graduated from high school, I was touring with a band called the Aquabats, and the lead singer Christian, he was really into collecting Japanese toys and talking about that stuff quite often. I had not been into it since I was a little kid, but then when he was showing me things, I knew what it was that he was showing me, and it was just kind of this recall. So we would be on tour, we'd both be buying stuff. Super 7 as a magazine had just started coming out, and they were kind of giving a lot of information in those toys, so that helped kickstart my adult collecting. And then there was a magazine called Giant Robot that had come out, and on the cover of that specific magazine was the collection of Tom Frank, the great Jumbo Machineder collector. And it was sort of a quick Bible of all the different names and even the name Jumbo Machineder, I didn't know what that was. I just knew them as Shogun Warriors at that point. And eBay was a thing that was just starting to pop up. So a lot late 90s, I'd say I really started collecting a lot of things. I remember my first eBay purchase was that 12-inch Mr. T that I still have. That's probably when I really started as an adult, buying and collecting toys. In high school, I had a friend from Japan whose family was very well off. I was a huge fan of Planet of the Apes. And there was a clothing line called Bape that was starting while I was in high school. He would wear stuff for a season or whatever, and then he would gift me these t-shirts from lines like Bape, and then there's another line from a company called Bounty Hunter that was going pretty big in Japan. And I didn't know what this stuff was. He'd be in Japan for months and then come home with Hyper Hobby magazines, and he'd show me these magazines, and then he would kind of give me toys and things. And that really, as I got older and as I started understanding what these things were, kind of kick-started a lot of my collecting. I always had Ninja Turtles and He-Man toys, lots of Star Wars and stuff just lying around my room. My greatest memory as a kid is my mom and we used to go on bike rides through this park by our house, my childhood home. And I remember getting off at a creek, but we were playing Ninja Turtles, and I remember having a Michelangelo, and she was playing as Donatello, and we were kind of hitting each other under this bridge. And it was just really fun, and I just sort of remember it being I had all sorts of other toys Visionaries and Transformers and various things like that, but I remember feeling much, much more special than anything I had. And it was something that she kind of continued with me, saw that I loved the Turtles, and I remember learning more about toy collecting and as a hobby and things. I remember us seeking out the Mondo Gecko figure, which was actually short packed, and her basically getting a guy, and she made the dude go in the back room of the toy store, bring out a fresh case of Ninja Turtles, and finding one Mondo Gecko amongst all the other figures, and really like looking through the case assortment and understanding that's why we could never find them, was because there was only one per case, and really understanding like short packing and things like that. I mentioned earlier about my first instance with eBay and having to set up an eBay account to find this 12-inch Mr. T doll that I loved, where he had his overalls and all the accessories and things like that, which was part of my love for Mr. T and the A-Team, which later led me to like create a book with Greg Mishka about the subject of Mr. T. The only real book that I worked on is the one with Greg. I have a few others in mind, and they were all going to be worked on pre-pandemic, and unfortunately, those kind of got sidelined. They're still like slowly in the works as things kind of come together, and it's kind of been interesting to change things up quite a bit since the pandemic has started, because my job as a photographer has diminished quite a bit, which I'm fine with. But that's when like being a toy maker and a production manager had taken hold more as a job for me. And I've been working on like a comic book right now with my friends Christopher Ulrich and Brandon Bradford of Blitzkrieg Toys, which has been really fun. And hopefully within the next couple of months we'll actually have like the completed book. I really think about like how this pandemic has changed the collecting community, and how, obviously everything, but when it comes to the topic of like toys and whatever else, it's like there's been like these massive changes, and weirdly kind of for the better for a lot of instances, I'd say. When it comes to photography, I guess I look at my photography as kind of the stuff that whenever somebody says they go to school for photography or whatever, it's kind of what they imagine that they want to do. Luckily, I didn't spend a lot of time in doing education and things like that. I just kind of did it all. But I worked primarily in like celebrity portraiture, some like street fashion, and a lot of art projects. As far as when it comes to fulfillment, it's interesting because I've got to work on some pretty amazing images at a completely different lifetime for myself. And I like the idea that I have all these tools at my disposal. I hate to go on another thing, but I work a lot closely with my good friend Justin Ishmael of Ish Toys, and we got to work with William Stout, and I got to use my my knowledge as a photographer to go and do portraits of Bill in his home with all this amazing art and things. And it's like, if I was just a production manager for toys, I would have just been sitting at my home or an office somewhere, punching in numbers and looking at sculpts. But instead I got to sit with Bill and interview him and see all the different paintings and take photos of his archive and things like that. It's like I get to experience so much having, I guess, being a little bit more multifaceted in being like, as opposed to just being a toy painter or even just a photographer or a production manager of things. It's like jumping around a little bit. It makes me a little schizophrenic, but I love it all. And I mean, to the dismay, I think, of my friends and family and my significant other, I'm just all over the place all the time. This whole sort of thing has been sort of a blessing and a curse in terms of like, I have my hobby as like a collector of stuff, and then it's like a job at the same time, and so it's very hard to blur like when it comes to how much time do I invest in this, because it's like I never sleep. Unfortunately, the time zones between China and Japan and stuff is like, it puts me on a completely opposite schedule when I'm working with the factories. But at the same time, I've worked on like toys that I've sort of envisioned that I've always wanted, and because they had never been done before, I was able to help produce those and put those out in the world. I'm kind of like that, okay, some guy was making stuff out of his home for a while, and then they stepped up into doing like, instead of a run of like 50 toys, it's like, okay, they jump from 50 to like 300 plus, where you're having to get factories and things involved. I'm the guy that people will hire on to help get those things produced, quality control, packaging, touring the factories, just making sure everything's coming correct, and then helping with distribution and getting mass quantity products sent out to people. I'll produce a toy and there's 500 orders of it, and then I'm able to sort of mail that all out within a couple of hours. It's like the business end of all that that stuff.
Do you find yourself painting? I mean, do you have to get your hands dirty from time to time?
Yes. Well, so when it comes to the toy painting and there's definitely like a love-hate relationship. I'm not the best toy painter. I would not even say that I'm in the best 50 in the US or anything like that. I love it. It's something that I like to do, but it's also something that I work at because I don't consider myself that great at it. And I have to like warm up quite a bit. It's kind of silly because I haven't painted anything for a month or so. And that's just simply because I got burnt out and I wasn't as inspired. But it's something that anytime I do it, it ends up feeling quite rewarding. And then when I do have people that buy stuff, it's always exciting. Every single one is like one of my children that are out there. And it's great. I've been very fortunate to have guys like Paul Kaiju and Mutant Vinyl Hardcore, Unbox, where they'll send me things to paint, Retro Band. You know, there's so many. I did a great run with a Draculaser with guys that really like how I paint and will allow for me to paint on their blanks and things and sort of like grow my artist portfolio when it comes to those. It's just one of those things. I don't consider myself naturally gifted at it, where a lot of those guys I do. I have to make things kind of happen. It takes quite a long time for me to kind of get to the final product. When it comes to painting soft vinyl toys, there's a few different approaches to it. There's like the factory style, there's like the artist one-off style, there's mini runs, micro runs. I would say like each toy is painted kind of carries the personality of the maker. An artist like Buana Spoons, for instance, I love his work, I collect it quite a bit. And because it's not something that I can do or I can really understand or wrap my mind around it, it makes me love it even more. I think because I paint toys, and when I see something that's not done by him, where there's almost a little bit more math involved versus art, where with his stuff, it's done with a true artist's hand. In my office, I keep a lot of action figures around because I just like playing with them, posing them. I have like a weird dream team of action figures I'll position together of just guys like, oh, if I could make my own version of the X-Men, it's just like, here's all this stuff I'll throw together, which is why I collect like the 1/12 size figures and around there. But then when it comes to collecting, I collect a lot of like soft vinyl artist toys. Those are obviously a little bit more sculptural or like a statue because it's like the articulation is very limited, but I love looking at them. And currently I collect a lot of like the vintage stuff. I've gone through the rounds of collecting a lot of modern makers and a lot of them are my great friends and I still collect some of that, but it's not to the same velocity as it was maybe like 5 years ago, where now I'm really focused on a lot of the vintage stuff. Still bounces back and forth and I think I drive my girlfriend pretty crazy because I'm stopping at literally every Target I pass by looking for like Ninja Turtles and things like that. And it's weird to be able to love like a mass-produced toy as much as like an artist-produced one as well. In the early 2000s, super late 90s, early 2000s, there was a store called Gotta Have It that was in this area. Frank & Sons, and just regular toy shops. And then obviously there was eBay. I've toured with a number of different bands as a photographer or like a glorified roadie or like a merch guy, and I would tour and be able to seek out like toy stores like Time Tunnel or Billy Galaxy. Oh, there's another great store called Kimono My House in the Bay Area and things like that across the US. And then, you know, going out of the country, there's different stores. And that's where I would find a lot of things in the early days. Right now, I'm doing less of that. I mean, pre-pandemic, I was going to Japan 3 or 4 times a year, and I would kind of save for those moments so that I can just shop out there because I just found things a little bit more rewarding while discovering things. And then there's certain toy lines that I won't, even though I know that I can buy them online, I won't buy them. Like Migos, for instance. I love finding Migos in the wild and kind of piecing them together like that versus, you know, just going on eBay, punching in, you know, complete Green Goblin, Migo, like, you know, easiest thing in the world, but it's a little less fun in a world where it's just like, I don't know, the hunt is just so much a part of it. I mean, I recently found, like an Uzit, for instance, I think I found it for $15 at a toy show. Quite a valuable toy, but it was just something so funny that I just saw it on the table and I'm like, I don't think this dude knows what he has. And he had a bunch of other really expensive other toys. And I just picked it up. I was like, oh, how much is this? He's like, oh, $15. And I was like, okay, cool. And right when I gave him the money and he saw the smile on my face, he was just like, I really screwed up, didn't I? And I just kind of like shrugged. I was like, yeah, kind of. I was really fortunate early on to where I had like a vision of like my Pee-wee's Playhouse. And so I spent many years living in a warehouse that I disguised as a business, but it was really where I was living, where I was storing a lot of my stuff. And during that time I was saving money to eventually buy a home with enough rooms that could house all of my stuff. And it was kind of crazy because I was one guy living alone in like a 5-bedroom house that was just filled with like a room for comics, a room for where I paint stuff. Like, here's a room where I have, I store all my gear for photography. It's like different rooms for different things. And right now, I basically have changed things up a little bit and relegated it to 2 rooms in my home, my office, and then I have a separate toy room where I keep a lot of my stuff that people have likened to like a Japanese toy store or like a comic book store. Like, that's the kind of look and feel that I put there. But like, I have most of my action figures in my office that I can play with, and then a lot of the soft vinyl in the toy room. So the term grail, I get into a lot of trouble over this kind of thing because I sort of come from the school of thought that you can't acquire a grail through money. It takes work, a lot of hunting. It's funny because I'll talk to a lot of modern toy collectors and they'll point out some sort of like, oh, this is the NECA Quang, this is my grail, or something that's like, you can go on eBay and find it for like 5 times the retail or something like that. And I kind of like laugh it off because it's like, a grail really should be something that's unattainable. It's something that like maybe by sheer chance you stumble upon it. Something that's not necessarily as mass produced. Like a grail of mine would be like the Mazinger Z villain Rokuron Q9. He's like the multi-headed robot jumbo machinder, which, I don't even know how many of those are on the planet. And I've never seen one in person. I have a lot of toys in my collection that I would say I wanted, and I was eventually able to find one. But they also kind of came from places where I knew if I had enough money, I could have just bought one. I remember talking to Tom Frank, the jumbo machinder collector, who has like a Garada K7, which those, there might be like 5 on the planet or something like that. And he was just like, sure, if Bill Gates wanted one, he could pay out the ass to get one. Outside of that, there's no stumbling upon one at like a flea market or, going to Mandrake in Japan and just finding one on the shelf, paying an exorbitant amount of money for one. When it comes to Holy Grail for me, I might have a few toys in my possession that I would say are like on that level. But a lot of it also comes to like, when it comes to like my art collection or my comic book art collection, that's where I've sort of acquired things that like, there's one of, or it's not as easy as just paying double what its actual value to acquire it. And one of the things I got was this large size Conagon. My friend Coop, he's a phenomenal artist, and he was looking to downsize his toy collection, and he knew I wanted it. When I was younger, I would see like interviews. It was always kind of in the background of photos of his, and I just looked at it as like, it was like a sign of like his success and his talent and things like that, almost hitting like mainstream, like he's in magazines and all these things. It was this thing that I always loved seeing and like he was basically like kind of moving on into like other things in his life, and he was just like, look, I know you would appreciate this. It can now live in your collection. And so he sold it to me. And I had him sign the bottom of a foot, which is like so common with like collecting toys where kids would write their names. And it was just so cool. Like that to me is like kind of like a grail. There's a bunch of them out there, but the fact that it came out of his collection and he as an artist had meant so much to me. I have posters of his that I looked over a decade for that I eventually was able to acquire. It just meant a lot to me. As far as like my family and friends and everyone else, when we talk about essentially my stuff, they've always kind of been into it. My mom was always really supportive. When I discovered comic books, her being so into it, taking me to the comic book shop and giving me a little bit of cash to buy comics because she just liked the idea that I was reading. And then my friends and family, they've always known me as a collector of things. So when people come over, there's no surprise to it. I think at times they're possibly like, oh, that's it. You know, like we thought it'd be crazier, which at a certain point, whatever people are seeing today that I have, imagine probably twice that, if not more, because I've purged quite a bit over the years. I'm part of a generation that grew up watching things like Pee-wee's Playhouse or the Munsters or the Addams Family, and you know, all of these characters sort of had like a unique home. And so that was something that I always, in my eyes, like success is like having this sort of like home. And knowing that I had all sorts of like crazy stuff, it's like, you know, obviously I wanted to have a home where the outside was like as crazy as the inside kind of type of thing. And then I just started acquiring not only toys, because I eventually knew that I would have like a partner, like people living with me and things like that, that like, you know, they might not want to be around toys all the time. So I had to kind of think of other things like home goods, whether it's like a furniture or the taxidermy or anything, like things to ornament the home. I always had interests in these types of things, and a lot of my photo shoots I did, I likened it a lot to like thinking like Indiana Jones and the adventure, you know, and so I started amassing props and like treasures from the various photo shoots from around the world that I did, and just kind of like decorated my home with them. On eBay, I was like looking up taxidermy. I had stumbled across these posts of these various taxidermy mounts of African animals. I noticed them, they were like really, really cheap. And I looked in the eBay listing, it shows that they're all from Lincoln, Nebraska, and they're pickup only. And there was tons of them. And I had reached out to the guy and basically struck a deal with him outside of eBay to buy everything from him at a very low price. And I basically booked a gig in the middle of the United States, told them to front me the money for the flights and everything. I'll get my crew, my gear, everything out there. And I basically rented a truck, drove the truck to Lincoln, Nebraska, loaded it up with all this taxidermy, and then drove it to Park City, Utah, did the photo shoot, and then just drove home with all the taxidermy mounts, which was pretty crazy because it was over 30 large pieces. I had just come home from a photo shoot in Africa, in sort of like the Tanzania, Kenya area where all these animals sort of resided. And I actually am pretty good at shooting guns, but I couldn't imagine actually killing anything. And so they're all like very old. So it's sort of like just, you know, I kind of got the best of both worlds, I guess. I guess my wish list, again, it goes back into like, I have the grails, and then I have things that are like just really expensive that eventually I'd love to just stumble upon. I am really interested in like a lot of the Japanese yokai toys, which there's only a small handful of the original ones that came out in like the 70s, and I have almost all of them. There's like 2 or 3 that I'm missing, and I'd love to get those. Those have just kind of gone up in value quite a bit. And of course, like the Jumbo Machinder toys, and those kind of are all what I actively look for. But then I spend quite a bit of money just like buying like the new NECA, you know, hero figures and things like that. I do have this funny story about a friend of mine. He has this illness that is very debilitative, and you know, he'll eventually possibly pass away from it. But whenever he's out at a toy store and people know that he has this illness, he always is using it as like, man, I'm so glad I found this. He's like, I've always wanted to get one before I die. And he's like a little bit of a devil, where I know he's trying to get like just like $10 off of this like He-Man Classics toy or whatever. And I'm just like, man, you're such a little dick. You know, like he'll always, like whatever he has in his hand is his holy grail, just so he can get like a couple bucks off, and then he'll like kind of be like, ah, sucker.